Bad love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This a fi we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a fi we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me. My name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area.
Welcome to the 27th edition. I'm assuming it's still on TV. Good morning and welcome to the 27th edition of Sunday Review for 2020. This is where we make sense of the news. I'm your host, Yaya Marin Coleman. Co-host this morning, that Dwight Neal. Good morning, Dwight.
Good morning to you, Yaya. Good morning to our host. Our guest. I wouldn't give away his name yet. And good morning to Belizeans, and everybody who is listening within reach. Good morning to you.
Good morning, our guest. I say in the local room, so I don't want to holler for and then you're ready for the camera.
Ready, ready.
All right, is our guest, Yasser Musa, artist and teacher. Good morning, Yasser.
Morning. Thank you for having me again.
It's on a regular, watch yourself.
Yes.
Got me to worry. Yes, sir. You might become the host next.
That's what happens. I said, I say, here, push yourself. No, he asked for dealing with early this morning before the shot. But I give him a pass, right? You can't say I don't give him a pass to it.
Go ahead.
When it comes to this morning's conversation, we can't have on the fan because the fan gives feedback on the technical side whenever we put the fan on. Our power they physically hot, and so that's why I see me with a fan regularly, and I know Dwight hot behind it too.
Yeah, Belmopan is seeing some very high temperatures very early. So.
Yes. So Yasser being our guest this morning, so first let me say thank you on behalf of myself and organizer Makeda Marin and Nzinga Foreman and others who helped organize for the not open the PGIA August 15, 2020 protest. So we had July 15th at Battlefield Park. Thanks for everybody who was supporting it everywhere. We have one ongoing virtual virtual protest and petition. You can check it out at Crumb Sunday Review Facebook page. We're going to get a link before the show done today. And the petition is online until the 15th of August. So they ask the people in solidarity with the government of Belize not opening the Philip Goss International Airport on August 15th because we not accept for them position of wealth over health. So we position is health over wealth. We're not just saying to open it, we're just saying to open it the 15th of August. Thanks, Harlan, who is our operator at Crumb Television, showing some of the images from that protest on Wednesday. It didn't have the numbers that we had hoped for, and that's not part of the conversation. And one of the reasons why I want to say yes, sir, especially when we talk African stories, African history, and I want to work with people who have credibility and have traction with doing research from an objective position and being truthful in their information. I really don't work well with people who are colonized in their mind and seem comfortable for stay there. I just say for myself, and I work well with people like that. And so you have to work apart, you could create harmony and synergy and move the intention forward. So July 22nd and 23rd of this month will be 101 years since the 1919 Black Belizean Revolution on July 22nd and 23rd. So yes, sir, tell me why that Black Revolution 101 years ago still relevant in 2020, especially as related to Black Belizeans.
Well, I think there is an amazing moment happening around the world. When we look at our TV, we see this thing called Black Lives Matter still going on. Obviously, the white supremacist forces of America is trying to press it down as hard and as fast as possible, trying to shift the narrative and which is ironic because they're shifting the narrative to say that they're solving the corona virus problem in America when that is killing more people than in any other part of planet Earth. But that just shows you how effective they can, or how threatened the forces of maintaining white supremacy are. But having said that, let us now shift to the context of why it is valuable, important, and urgent that young Belizeans especially understand the amazing moment that occurred on the 22nd and 23rd of July in 1919, just 101 short years ago. I say 101 short years because we live in a culture of forgetting. But in Belize, it is even worse. We live in a culture where we don't even know what we're forgetting because we have been so ingrained in living in the present moment because of the urgency of living, the catastrophe of of joblessness, of landlessness, of so many other social and political problems that we are taught that history is completely irrelevant. It is of absolute no use while reverting into the past. Adding to that is the idea that the internet was turned on a few years ago, and that is when history started. So the technological imposition on our lives, added to this already colonized mind, as you call it earlier, is really playing a very sick game on our national psyche and on our ability to analyze. So I think that we have to be calm and we have to be careful and we have to know that time is on our side because our ancestors have resisted for hundreds of years, not 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, hundreds of years. So we owe it that as living people today to know that we didn't just arrive here at this moment like out of some kind of spaceship, that there is a long corridor of resistance and a long track of survival action, which is based on rebellion and revolt and uprising, which is in direct assault upon a system that has been going on, especially in this part of the world where we live, which is the Americas, we call it, been going on for at least 14 years. So I think we need to be careful in how we speak in terms of not saying, oh, well, that is gone, don't worry about that. But we need to be very calm about it. And being a teacher, I realize more and more that the classroom is a perfect stage, a perfect setting for our deliberate and intentional process, because as you and I always discuss, Yaya, tyranny does not sleep. So why is it that we should be sleeping?
Respect. Let me ask. I hear Belizeans, especially since the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been around, I think maybe since 2013 in the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably earlier than that, but not as active and not as visible.
You hear a number of Belizeans say, read it and say this, we don't have racism in the Belize. Why you feel that Belizean people think, that we don't have racism in the Belize?
Because in a lot of instances, we have been conditioned to accept certain things. We should be nice to each other. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. And we are not taught to answer back or to defend ourselves when we feel like things are not in our best interest. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why churches do so well in Belize. So that this should be a different day. But I recall growing up where I said, well, they may tell me this and they may tell me that, oh, no pay them no mind, man. They don't understand what they talk about and that kind of thing. And so, in a way, it lends itself to a more peaceful solution of issues, but it doesn't solve a lot of the problems. And so, the racism becomes more insidious. And then it's only when you're in situations where you hear people starting to refer to one another in derogatory terms. Oh, that one they got this and that one they got that. And then you begin to understand that there is racism and people are treated differently based on appearance rather than their capacities. And so this concept that racism does not exist in Belize is a myth, right? And until we are ready to admit that, we always have it lurking in the background, right? Um, so there are lots of instances I can think about, but I think the larger consideration should be that in fact people are treated differently based on their appearance in beliefs. We just know how to talk about it.
Respect. This line of conversation have everything to do with 101 years ago revolution by Black Belizeans coming back from World War One, and then leading about 3,000 Belize tongue people for revolt. So yeah, sir, why you think one lot of Belizeans still feel set think that racism no exists at Belize?
Um, that is a special show which will require a psychiatrist. But let me get to another issue because I am urgent because I am privileged to be on your show to talk for a few minutes. I want to talk. I earlier spoke about 500 years, right? I want to talk about 300 years in Belize. That's a short span, right? And I think if I can talk about these things in 3 different modules, I can probably end up answering your big question because you come with the hard, like you're like a fastball pitcher. You don't try to throw a curveball or a slider. You just throw the hard fastball and then you expect me to swing at it, but I will miss. So let me try to practice. 300 years, there is evidence. I'm talking colonial white people evidence, the Spanish, where in 1724, some Spanish missionaries, the kind of priests that they call Franciscan friars, recorded in 1724. If you do the math, I'm not Prescadogan, but he'll probably have a lot of Bolito, if he's listening, a lot of Bolito options. But in 1724, if you add it up, it's like 296 years ago. So let's call it 300 years because we're not sure about time. It's a concept I'm trying to develop. And in that time, the Spanish saw in what was called the settlement at the Bay of Honduras by the British that they had already started to bring in enslaved African people through Jamaica. Okay? So fast forward now a few years later, 1741. By then, they said enslaved African people started to revolt. And this is the important part of this narrative, that they didn't come here the way we have been taught, like a group of family members, that it was a family affair. Oh, I black, you white, we're all getting together. Let's, okay, chop trees down and you need to carry the home base in England. That the revolt started immediately. And then again, there is clear records of a revolt again in 1744. Of course, these revolts are not inside the imagination of our young people because these have been erased. And as I said, we are not just forgetting our history, we are in a process of not even knowing what we are forgetting. That's even worse. Then, fast forward 20 years later, 1765, again, there is revolt of enslaved Africans in the settlement in the Bay that were brought by the British here to do labor for free. Again, in 1768, there is record of escaped enslaved people going up the New River and fleeing the system of slavery. And then, of course, in 1773, which if all the Bolito numbers you want to try to remember, that one is big. 1773 is when the largest recorded uprising, revolt, occurred near the Belize River. We know it. It's right. We know what the Belize River today. And that revolt lasted several months. It's not like, oh, it happened and then we run. No. Months. They had to bring in reinforcement from Jamaica. It really caused a major issue with the power, with the white supremacist system of trying to extract and dominate another people's land, Maya land, and extract African people to do that work for free. So we're dealing with a land issue and a people issue, right? Now, here comes the sun, as they would say, it's about to rise. In 1779, we're now being peddled a story that 14 Flowers Bank family members voted for everybody to be united. And by 1798, we're all united, white and black, as one beautiful family. So there is the root narrative of, on one hand, you have this constant resistance, and then on the other hand, you have this idea that we are all united to build a nation shoulder to shoulder. That is the core DNA of the British ideology, that white people and black people are together and we're building this nation together. So I think that's the first concept. If we just look at it from, we have to look at the root where this idea that was just discussed earlier, Dwight, I forgot your name, Dwight, sorry. I almost got Dwight. Dwight was discussing so how we still in 2020 are very comfortable saying, oh, we don't have no racism, yeah, man, that belongs to America. And it's that narrative that is far away, like in a distant land. And that here, I mean, I know it doesn't help that we are pounded with a tourism narrative. Come here, we're friendly people and everything is all right. But I think sometimes we get confused with how we're supposed to act and who we really are in our being. So, okay, give a time and start.
No, it makes sense. I try to reach where operator at Creme TV for asking for show the slides what complement where Yasser just shared. Because it's extremely important in looking at 2020, for example, when you hear that the popular sentiment is that Belizeans not support the opening of the Philip Goulson International Airport August 15, 2020. That's the popular sentiment. Yet when given the space and time for come out and physically represent what they said and feel, oftentimes Belizean people not sure. And because oftentimes we don't know for we stories, I know that we come from people who resist, we revolt, we rebel, we not go long. But then tell we what another story, his story, and we buy line hook and stick and go along. So that's why it's so important for we work with other people, do the research. One of more people ask if there's going to be an Emancipation Day community action this year. Yes, there will be. It was different because of COVID-19 and money no day. So we still have it this year. Our Emancipation Day speaker will be one African Belizean, Baba Adolfo. I always pronounce this brother name wrong, but it's Aondofe Iyo, Dr. Adon Aondofe Iyo, that this year's Emancipation Day speaker. And that man not get the amount of credit what that man deserve for the work what that man really put in to doing the research of Belize from an African and Mayan roots perspective. And so it's very important for we, every year the theme that is same for a number of years for Emancipation Day, free your mind. And we have one individual responsibility for that. And so this 1919 Black Belizean Revolution, the part of hundreds of years of Black people rising up. Now, even before for example, when you look on the image, thanks Harlan, Harlan, they show some of the slides now. Even before the Battle of St. George's Key Day myth, it tell you, and this would it go back because we said 1919, but would it tell you over 300 years, because the history shows 1724, the sighting of enslaved African people. And then you have, like Yasser shared, you have 1765, 1768, 1773. Consistently, when Black people primarily revolted, all the way up before the 1798 battle, Black people revolt. After 1798, Black people still the revolt. So how you want we, I know that maybe they never have some enslaved African people what take part in that, if you want to call it a battle. And I say no to that. I just said that that's another story for we people that we just go along with oppressed people as systems of oppression. And that is what the 1919 Black Revolution was about, that Belizean people never just got along. They organize, and then someone is dead. And they don't give up. So that was said to we Belizean people, the Creole bloodline in particular, because the Garinago people know their story, the Mayan people know their story. that real then Creole brunch would prefer go with the European narrative that really find out about the African stories and hold fast it for inspiration and motivation to move forward. Where the more, so when I have African American studies being taught at SJC, then I hear and come up with Belizean studies, but I still want watered down version of the European narrative. When you hear other stories coming forward, then they have pushback on it, and then colonial-minded people who are in a power just dig their healing more. And this is now one of the first Black governments, I believe, ever. So for just say, for the Black people are dead in a Black Lives Matter, but for Black people get at that position of empowerment, we have to free with mind and know with self.
But yeah, if I may, because I think one of the big challenges with the whole Black Lives Matter thing is the false narrative that's coming in, that's being promoted, that says all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter, which is why Black lives should matter. And then why is it that, and we say, the excuse has been that the youths in Belize City then create the problem with the INA. And I just say, no, they are symptomatic of the larger problem that exists in the community. So their lives should matter too, because you need to ask yourself, if all of us were born in the same way, without any faults whatsoever, how is it then that by the age of 16 and 17, they become so bad that nobody wants to have anything to do with them, and then you just left them, make them kill themselves? There has to be something that speaks to the period between birth and 16 years old that contributes to that situation. And so if you look at what is happening, I think Evan was the person who said that predominantly in the Colby institution, the Belize Central Prison, predominantly the African American youths, Black Belizean youths, they're in the place. And so why is that so? Why is that so? When the majority of the population is tending towards, the demographic shift has been towards having more Hispanic people in the population. Why is it that we're still seeing a predominantly Black population in the prison? And why is it that it's predominantly from Belize City and some of the other urban areas that have high numbers of Black residents? Sorry, that's the word I try to get told. Like Dangriga, for example. All right? Why is it that way? And we have to admit that, yes, Black lives have to matter. So this narrative about all lives matter, yes, we agree, all lives matter. So even more why Black lives should matter, because we're losing them at a disproportionate rate. I just thought I should inject that at this point. No.
Well, it's related. We have to go back to move forward. Everywhere going in the world, Black people at the bottom, the Black people, they go oppressed. The Black people are dead. The Black people, they take lick. There's a reason why, which is why we have to go back, Sankofa, for move forward, to understand why we get you and why this 1919, July 22nd, 23rd, Black Revolution is so important, as well as the revolutions, the uprising of Black people in Belize prior to 2020. That we have a responsibility to find out for we ancestor stories and put it next to what the European oppressors and for them storytellers tell we. And not because you in a government mean that you're not guilty of it. You're especially guilty of it when you're in a power. And so the time for the first break. Yes, sir, you want to lock off this first break with any closing remarks?
Well, I would need more time, so let's go to break, but I will want to talk about the second of the three ideas that I came here to talk about. The first was to set the stage as to the early evidence of enslaved African people in our country and how they were persistent and consistent in their rebellion and in their revolt. And then now I would want to talk about, after the break, in the 1800s, how there is a clash not just of two forces, but three: the African, the Maya, and the British.
Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area.
back to the second segment of Sunday Review. Welcome back to the second segment. I can calm myself down. This Dwight got me hyped during the break. I blame Dwight, right? Like I never fully participated in the hypeness. So yes, this is the second segment of Sunday Review. Yaya, Dwight, and our guest Yasser Musa, artist and teacher. We're discussing the July 22nd and 23rd, 1919 Black Belizean Revolution and the relevance to we today in 2020 and the 101 anniversary of that revolution, will come up next week, Wednesday and Thursday. So Yasser had part 2 for share with me from the 1800s.
Well, obviously, to look at things is not perfect in a sense of 100 years, then 100 years, but I just was wanting to make it more simplified in my own mind so I don't sound like I'm all over the place. But the 1900s, like let's say from 1807 to 1894, that's a dominant, very important part of the story of what we call today Belize, because 2 things come into play. The central narrative we've been fed, and a healthy diet of it, is that the white oppressor, British, gave us freedom, gave the enslaved African freedom. And that happened in 1838, August 1st, Emancipation Day. But the question I would want to ask is, why is it then that that Freedom Day is not even considered as part of the most important day in the whole year? Because that wouldn't anybody, they ask them, do you value your freedom? Do you want to be free? That is, to me, a very strong idea in any nation development going forward, right? But I think we should trace why it is that we don't have that attitude. In 1807, they had this thing called the Abolition Act, March 25th. These things are precise and they're all recorded. But slavery was not abolished then. It took another almost 30 years for it to be abolished. So now let's go back a little. We are saying that in 1798, all was well, everybody was in love, shoulder to shoulder, we made a nation, black and white. But 30 more years later, half of that equation, or sorry, 70% of that equation was still enslaved. So that immediately destroys the logic and the truth about that. In 1820, another huge revolt occurs where, again, enslaved people of African origin, led by Will and Sharper, 2 enslaved African men, led a revolt along the Belize River again. It was so bad, quote unquote, in the minds of the oppressor that they had to declare martial law on the settlement at the time. So let's fast forward a little more. 1838 now, emancipation comes August 1st. 50 years later, 1888, Belizeans, and I got this from the Black Notes of Yaya Marin Coleman. That's a beautiful name of a book, by the way, Black Notes by Yaya Marin. Belizeans identifying themselves as descendants of enslaved Africans celebrate the 50th anniversary of emancipation. Now, that is the majority population, 70% plus, could be as high as 85%. Of course, let me add something. I don't want it to sound like I'm sticking a pin, because it's a big part of a narrative that we are completely erased to, but my new terminology is, it's not like we're forgetting. It is as if we don't know what it is we're forgetting. In the 1840s, 50s, 60s, right up until 1905, there was a huge war raging right north of us called the Caste War of the Yucatan. That is not even considered a part of our story. And in that war, Maya sisters and brothers were rebelling against the same oppressive, but this time Spanish, because the Spaniards controlled and colonized that part of the Yucatan, the north. And then the Spaniards were trying to move and encroach into Maya land, and the Maya resisted for 50 years. War, all-out war, bloody. 300,000 people dying. Right above Chetumal area, 300,000 people, Bacalar, going on. So we are dealing now with a century that is ripe with the idea of freedom and the idea of landlessness. So land and freedom is a huge thing for that century. Of course, the way it started to us is like, okay, all right, slavery is over, guys. By the way, you're going to be kept enslaved for 5 more years. We're going to call it apprenticeship. You're going to work still for free, but we're going to give you a valuable skill. And now we're going to call slavery wage system. So all of a sudden, you're going to get a little bit of money, but then you have to buy things from free shop and you have to buy things from who really bring 5,000 miles away. So this idea of indigenousness, this idea of growing food on your land, that is constantly being erased from the mind of people, because the African mind obviously had in them a very rooted sense, and I mean this literally, of planting and collective spirit. That is being destroyed slowly. So then, I know I'm going into a lot of details here, but this is very important. This is like a crash course. In 1889, Simon Lamb, we hear that name, but we don't hear that name in a context. We just hear, oh, Simon Lamb is a black man, he's very important. Why is he important? Well, he formed a committee in order to keep celebrating Emancipation Day, but the British authorities realizing now this is a dangerous start. They undermine that process, and then they said, no, you know what we're going to do? We will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the famous Battle of Jaggi. But that is more important. So unity over freedom. Think about it. Unity has been contaminated. We're all used to this term now because of Corona. Infected in our psyche that we are to be unified. One country, Maya, Mestizo, Creole, Garifuna, Mennonite, everybody all are with a one. Yet, when somebody raises their hand and say, what about me? Black Lives Matter. No. It's not that. It's all we have to matter. So this is where this narrative keeps feeling as if we are undermining our humanity. Black Lives Matter means human lives. But it is, if we just keep saying all lives matter, we are undermining the truth. Because what we're doing is saying that all of the history of oppression and exploitation is irrelevant. The world is new. We turn on the internet. Yes, this is a new perfect world. Finally. Imagine this, Yaya. We're supposed to talk about 1990 and we haven't even reached 1990. This is how all my classes go, by the way. I go there to talk about something and then it ends up being something else. That's beautiful.
I like it.
1894. So we're ending the second chapter here. And of course, I have to give big credit to the black notes of Yaya Marine Coleman. 1894, we have a forest worker, laborers. They say, oh, it's just a laborers riot. No. It is the forest workers, the same wage, so-called wage earners, the so-called enslaved Africans. It's the same people are now rising up against the ruling class who are chancing them not because slavery ended, okay, all is perfect again, but there is evidence of a very strong riot again in 1894. So then that sets the stage. But before we go to the next stage, if I can just say this, the world came under a massive, huge change in this moment of history, which is called the Industrial Revolution, where machines started to replace people. So the motive of white supremacy was not, oh, I am such a good guy, I'm going to free people now. No. The motive was, I got this machine for do this work now, so I don't need their people no more. And so the Industrial Revolution caused havoc even in the European mind, because then the European powers were already going into Africa and said, this stuff for me, Senegal for me, Kenya for me, Angola for me, South Africa for me. And then they just carve up all those spaces, which is geographic space, and call them nations, which is not really nations in the sense of the indigenous people there calling themselves nations. But they were carving it up geographically for resources, the same way they carve up Belize. And the carving up of resources is what caused the 20th century to start off in a full-blown meltdown for the European mind. Because Germany said, well, I'm supposed to be on top. England and France, who were allies, said, well, I have to be on top. And then all hell broke loose and World War I. At the dawn of the 20th century, which is only 120 years ago, World War I is what caused what we're going to talk about next, the 1919 revolution.
Respect, yes, sir. And again, it's very important that we have then conversations, because then conversations are gaps in our stories. Quite a portion of the world that move forward is on reparation conversation right now. And the conversation is very much missing in Belize from a consciousness perspective. So one of the real concern is that you have people who said and they represent Black people that Belize, when I make you know what they do and when then they do it, and where you don't know for their mindset when then they have their conversations. And so it's dangerous when you have people who are in a power, we're very, and when we say colonial minded, we mean that you primarily accept what the oppressor tell you without question it, and you defend it to your life. You want to give up your life, you want to defend it so much, as opposed to say, make I be objective and say, the oppressor are the people that were killed for we ancestors and we continue for kill we. So how I just accept for their story? What for we ancestors say about for we self? What the colonizers record their will, their deeds, their letters, their newspapers. You go through the archives and find out what for their own writings say about we African ancestors. And so it's so important that we tell for we stories in a way where we could relate to it. And so I really want to keep in mind that reparation or another conversation. There was recently a reparation Zoom for Indigenous and African people, and you had people from around the Caribbean region. Our sister Therese Bilal Nweke represented Belize after ASCRIM TV for sure the Zoom of that particular conversation about reparations, because it's important that we have that conversation that Belize and respond, and it's important that we know who are the people. That information where Harlan show 2 years ago, Mama Baina Bello was in Belize for our Emancipation Day, and every Thursday for several weeks now, she have on Zoom named Baina and Friends, and she bring in somebody that is known around the world and have 2 hours conversation, question and answer. And she have this, where they sit on the screen right now, where they ask, what is freedom? It's a question. And it's from, I believe, a 4th century philosopher in Ethiopia. It's so long that about. One of the things that stick out for me is that tyranny never sleeps. And in understanding what freedom is, that one process. And we all have a responsibility in this process, as well as all other things we have to do in our life. So, Dwight, I had to talk for a while. Make I get your 2 cents, but I need to listen intently. But I like Dwight there, because Dwight not there, my thinking. Dwight not there 100% on board, But Dwight represents a good demographic of Belizeans where, they're open to learning new things and listening. So, based on all we hear me, yes, sir, so make I hear where we don't know Dwight, and how that relate to your life as a Black man that believes.
Well, as I had said on previous shows, my reality, most of my, I wouldn't call it racism, but most of the discrimination that happened in my life happened because I was the product of a single parent family. I only had my mom, and for many, many years, I think up until recently, being the child of a single parent was seen as a stigma. You don't got no pay, you don't got no money in the house. And so the Blackness, if you want to call it that, was mostly secondary. Additionally, I was fortunate to live in mostly Black communities, Belize City, parts of Cayo, Stan Creek Valley, Dangriga. And so you were constantly around people who were more like you than not like you. And a lot of the, if you want want to call it racism that I encountered didn't come so much when I was growing up, but more after I grew up and started when I entered the workforce and I started to travel around Belize. And then you started, and again, it wasn't that in your face racism like I got when I traveled around the United States, for example, where people were not afraid to tell you how they felt. In Belize, it was always more insidious. The small things where they try to deny you, or small things where they tell you, and then they begin to realize, that never come across the way I may expect it to be. All right, so those were my experiences, and I like the way how Yasser is bringing it out. That in fact, there has been a process to this entire situation that we find ourselves in, where it never started yesterday, and so to untangle it, we have to make a conscious effort. We have to tell ourselves that, listen, first of all, let's be honest. Let's understand that whatever was being written or whatever was being said was not in our best interest. It was in the interest of the people who were writing it, and they had an agenda. Um, I always remember having classes with Mr. Leo Bradley, God rest his soul, and you could always, whenever you ask certain questions, you could always hear, quote unquote, the English narrative coming out, the English interpretation. And it wasn't until long afterwards that I started to find out about books by Belizeans, like, for example, Assad Schumann, and a couple of other black, well, I shouldn't say black, but non-European or
People of
non.
color.
Some of them are not really people of color per se, but yeah, they wouldn't be considered European as such. And so it is then that you begin to realize that, yeah, there's something else behind all of what is happening. However, in addition to that, listening to Yasser talk about Simon Lamb, I wasn't aware that Simon Lamb wanted to celebrate Emancipation Day, because growing up like in Hillside, Southside Belize City, where everybody was NIP, you learned that Simon Lamb was the one who started Centenary, all right? And that is how 10th of September used to be called. So up until I was a little boy, people in my house still used to call it Centenary, because that is how we knew 10th of September. And that was the narrative that we were given, that in fact, they celebrate the Battle of St. George's Key and the victory of the English over the Spanish, okay? Later on, I learned that there was some friction between the English and the Spanish, because a lot of the runaway slaves used to go over a Petén and go to Bacalar and then places there, and the English had a hard time getting their slaves back because the Spanish no want to get them back. All right, and so there was an additional friction between the English and the Spanish, and then you had the 7 Years' War and a whole lot of other things that were happening in Europe, which Yasser didn't bother to mention, which all had an impact in how we were being seen and how we were being treated here in Belize. And I think it's important that regardless of what ethnicity you have in Belize, that people start to understand the importance of why we are where we are right now, and the fact that you get so much of this resistance from Black people in Belize, because it is not something that started overnight, and it's not something that there has always been an undercurrent, and that undercurrent. Then I say, if you buy long enough, one of these days you buy over, and essentially we are seeing quite a few bit of that happening in recent years, no? But I venture to say that a lot of what happens when people riot or when people protest has to do with economic conditions and things that continue on from the lack of participation or the resistance or the restrictions that are put on you when you cannot participate in the economic side of things, no? So a lot of it has to do, well, I know there's no equality when it comes to land, and that has an economic effect. There's no access to jobs and that kind of thing. And again, that has an economic effect. So if you look at the, and I preempt Yasser and leave it, when it comes to the 1919 revolution, it had something to do with not only the bad treatment that they were getting, but the fact that when they got back here, they weren't even properly compensated for the work that they did. So there was an economic component to all of what was happening again. So I'm gonna let Yasser to take over again.
Yes, yes, sir. Take me out to, I tell you what actually happened. So you tell me about the Industrial Revolution.
And what Dwight said about the 7 Years' War is important, but then if I had loaded this whole thing up with the we would have lost the TikTok generation. And I am very mindful that that is my day job, that I have to face 13 and 14-year-olds. They don't got no time to hear a lot of detail. And I believe in teaching history as a conceptual idea so that then you can go forward and find yourself there. Let me start off with a quotation. And this quotation was made in the Mandela on the 13th of June, 2018. The quotation goes like this: "You can go to school in Belize from you are 5, and you will never, from you are 5 until you are 55, and you will never know anything about the 1919 riots and what led up to them." Evan X. Hyde. Now that is important because we are not bringing up this 1919 thing because it is some kind of secret and hidden. Yes, those things are true. It is a secret and it is hidden from our curriculum and things. But more importantly, it is valuable knowledge that we as Belize people should have. All Belize people. Now, if I talk about All Lives Matter, all Belize people need to know about this because on the 22nd and 23rd of July, 1919, 300 plus Black Belizean ex-servicemen, yes, as Dwight said, having experienced racism in the theater of war in Europe, but also having experienced racism in Belize, and that is manifested not necessarily by the color of their skin only, because the majority were Black, but because of the treatment, the landlessness that they had to face. They didn't have access to land, the joblessness that they have to face, and what Dwight said is important, the compensation, and you touched on a bigger question earlier with repatriation effort. That repatriation idea and compensating people properly has been, again, a legacy of white supremacy in terms of whenever that comes up, oh, no worry about it, you all are back in town, let's all get together shoulder to shoulder again. Now, on the 22nd of July at 8 p.m., you see I'm being very precise because sometimes people think we're making this up. 1919, 101 years ago, almost, we almost reach next week, Wednesday, it will be 101 years. The 300 ex-servicemen, they lined up in order, they're military people, near the swing bridge, right on Regent Street, Albert Street area, and started to head over as a beginning to the other side of town, which is into North Front Street and Queen Street. For those of you not familiar with downtown Belize City, it is in the heart of Belize City this happened. And they did it in an organized way. They had whistles and they were blowing whistles and they stopped and they moved and they stopped. But by 10 o'clock, listen to this, over 3,000 townspeople, majority Black, of course, had joined them, and things, as the colonial mind would explain it, that when riot broke up, they broke up the window here, they broke up the window there, and they did it in this very organized way, of course, until it kind of got out of hand. But by 10 o'clock, the police as well had joined. That is a historical issue that we need to think about, and why we, meaning last year when Image Factory and UEF started to pay more attention, and we published this book, which is still online for free. You can download it and Yaya has, for 1 year, I don't know if today they did it, but for 1 year they had that banner, and you can see the website and you can download this for free. But this book called Rights, written by our Maya brother Delmer Zib, who comes from the village of San Antonio, Cayo. This book gives a very short 20-page chronicle of what I'm talking about because I don't have enough time. But I want to repeat that this thing was not just about racism. That was a big part, but it was about the condition on the ground, the landlessness, the joblessness, and the inability by the system to recognize compensation for people that had already, listen to this, which I think is very important. These men had gone to war for a European power, risked their life under the umbrella of the British Empire. So what you always hear people, you know, they have special remembrance and so. Last year, when we did that event, we got some pushback from people who associate themselves with the, what they call it, the ex-servicemen league. Or, I'm not talking officially, but people who are associated with it by saying that, oh, this was just a riot. Why are you guys calling it a revolution? And then the same day we had that protest, condemned the former site of what they used to. So they were having a wreath-laying ceremony at the Memorial Park. So there are these contrasting views, perspectives. I am not saying anything disparaging about what they're doing. I'm just saying that we need to go deeper into what our story is really about, the truth about it. It's not just about laying a wreath or just being a soldier. It is about the conditions that you're in and the oppression that you're facing. And I think something that we still struggle with as people to try and ignore and erase the terminology that my good friend artist Katie Usher teaches me every day about. The erasure is real. So there we have it.
And definitely,
go ahead.
We have to talk about the role of women in a revolutionary work. Usually we have that same banner to the bottom of our screen, and we have been having it consistently. I don't know why we don't have it this morning. Thanks for showing the bookmark, Harlan. And it very, again, for said the role of women, because remember now, we live in a patriarchal world where there's an imbalance in power with people who identify as males and people who identify as females. And white supremacy has to do with the imbalance in a power. Somebody got more power over somebody else. So because we're European people, or referred to as white people, or one of the African people or black people, we could look power now. I know if one or run away, can look physically different than we. So we could find, you know, believe me, a majority black country. But then you had some people, you know, they look more European than black people. There are black people, you know, but the way they call it Royal Creole, who ascribe to the European values and narratives.
The original Creole term, Mingo.
When, I don't know that one, that's something new. When they had the 1919 Black Revolution, the black people, and never only the white people that deal with it, no, because they get beat up too. Then deal with some of the Royal Creole there as well, where they had grievances with, they raised them price that by the thing they in and they shop the merchants, them get really dealt with. And some of them get backs up and slap up and beat down, gunshot, gun off, all of that. So that understand that there has always been the roots, people in at the bulk at the base. So you had like with Sister Annie, you had Rufus Hall, I think is the name. And one time, yes, sir, I want to come back in the next segment to tell you more about that. But in a local Creole term, I said some of the same black people sell out the roots people and then get position, and then the roots people get some serious consequences when all of them are responsible for organizing and executing the revolution. So I always have people who sell you out in the process, and all of us kinfolk, then our kinfolk. Not because you're black mean you have good intentions to black people, like this is our black leadership for the past 12 years. Black people take lick like probably never ever and more black administration. So don't make people black things say if you think I'm a black president think me I'm better for black people in the United States. No. They get caught up in that because the people that look like black people mean they got. So then I had to water one there for we make our life a living hell. So again, yes, I want to share what that the Action, UEF and Image Factory has been collaborating. Well, really, ever since SJC come up with their Mayan and African studies, what I call Damalimi link, yes, sir. But I grow for love, my brother. Oh, belated birthday on a Friday.
Bye,
Belated
bye.
Earth Strong, yes, sir.
I'll wait for the
But
cake,
but
man.
I said to people, like
Think-
seriously, I lean for that and say, you know what, I'm a Palestinian brother. I'm a Palestinian brother that time. And solidarity with Palestinian people there for sure. And so if we look for people we could have allies with, create solidarity with, well, genuinely know the stories and willing to work with you for tell it. So they're not because they're not willing to work with other people. I am, but after I work with so much organization that believes, and the truth is, I just some people are at different levels of awareness. You can't give, we don't have. But I not dip on the colonial narrative. And I want to call it like I see it. I call it what I call what the association name just want to make a call if the people know.
No, yeah. I just wanted to say quickly that coming out of the 1919 riots, there's a significant portion of Belize City that owes its existence to some of the settlement that happened after that riot, and the whole Mesopotamia area, Mesopotamia and part of Queen Square. Anything that have name like Amara, Euphrates, and Clues, and Tigris, and so. And I know Yasser can speak to that a lot better than I can. I just grew up in the neighborhood. I don't really know much of the history because it wasn't discussed in the house when I was growing up. But additionally, Naya, I just get a text from a good friend of mine in Independence, and he's asking that we touch on the whole issue of opening schools and the airport. And if we could give some feedback and so.
I don't know how much time we can give to that this morning because the conversations are had on WBs, especially almost every morning. So really, I use this platform to bring on different conversation, but just as relevant. So then two issues. So we have to go ahead and take a break. July 22nd and 23rd, 2020, that the 101 anniversary of the 1919 Black Belizean Revolution, and UEF will have Emancipation Day actions this year. You know, you can expect early next week. For here, it was different because we're living in COVID-19, and we guess we guest speaker will be on Belizean this year, Dr. Ondofe Iyo. Yes, sir. When you come back, please, we have to talk over brother some more.
Yes,
So
sure.
stay tuned.
Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Oh no, this a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. I know we should always help our neighbor, especially in time of a natural disaster. But this is not the case with Guatemala because the poor people will never see a dollar. Only a few rich man will start to.
Final segment of Sunday Review for this morning. No. Welcome back to the final segment of Sunday Review for this morning, Sunday, July 19th, 2020. I can hail up my auntie Myrtle Palace birthday that Tuesday.
What?
So, and I remember people's birthday and I get and hail up. Yeah, so we're Yaya, Dwight, and Yasser discussing the 1919 July 22nd, 23rd Belizean Black Revolution as it relates to consistent community action for make remember with stories and tell with stories. Ubat Educational Foundation and Image Factory Art Foundation, consistent with the work from engaging the public, share with stories. So Dwight, no, yes sir. Go ahead and tell away the rest of the story. One time when people revolt, what happened in that night? How long the thing will last?
Well, the whole that first night was very intense, but the whole revolution was 2 days, 22nd and 23rd, which reminds me I have to change the date on that banner we made. We only put 22nd. So we make many mistakes. I have to say that. But I wanted to start this part of so now we're in the third. Obviously I have my brain set for this. 1, 2, 3. It's like the oil that you cook with. The third part of it is the 1919 and what happened. Obviously, I can't go through everything, so I recommend that you read the book and go through it. But I want to discuss right now the two narratives at that time that were competing, which is the roots narrative and the accommodation narrative, and I'll explain that. But to explain that, let me read something from the book, which you helped a lot to fix and help edit, and not only that, but help guide the process of this book that Delmer I'm hearing like a feedback.
Yeah.
Anyway, the quote from the book comes under the context of some of the reasons and the context of this 1919 revolt, right? So the quote begins, due to the continual inhumane treatment experienced by dark-skinned women, white British.
We're not hear good, yes, sir.
Yeah, yo. We'll
All right, try it again, because you're like the in or out.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, much better.
I want you to hear this quote.
Yeah, it's coming, but it's not coming from me. Anyway, so I'm saying that due to the continual inhumane treatment experienced by dark-skinned women from white British oppressors, women, children, and men whose homes were clean, whose clothes were washed, whose food were cooked, and whose white-skinned babies and children were nursed and cared for primarily by black women, sisters felt justified in to rise up and rebel on equal treatment. The horrific realities of black people in 1919 were intentionally created. Similarly, as it continues today, 100 years later in 2019. Now, that is to say that there is an important distinction to be made of this because the revolt was quashed. I said it only lasted 48 hours, so somebody had to stop it. So it was not the British authorities that stopped it. It revolutionaries that took control, right? The root people to say that we don't want this white oppression anymore. But leaders pacified the group and tell them to calm down and order restored. Law and order, as Donald Trump would say. Samuel Paine and H. E. McDonald, despite the outcome of insurrection, the revolution expressed disgust for the oppressive political and economic system. We cannot separate what led to the anger and the frustration and all that stuff. Sometimes people use the word anger like it is a disqualifier. Like, oh, they're not angry people. As a matter of fact, I can quote Donald Trump right here. He calls the Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate, treason, sedition, and insurrection. Now, he's in charge of a government that spends $700 billion with a B, US, so that's 1.4 billion Belize dollars every year on military. And he still feels he needs to go out of his way to brand and condemn a movement that is coming from the people. As a matter of fact, this might sound like a unusual segue, but it is not. On the 4th of July this year, 2020, he, the said president of the United States, went to Mount Rushmore, which is a place that they carve some white people face in, but that place is not ordinary place. That is the Black Hills of the Lakota people. That is sacred. That is probably the most sacred mountain. So that it would be equivalent to go to an ancient Maya ceremonial space, and we just go carve up the governors on those temples as an example, right? The British governors in colonial time. Anyway, he stood in front of those, the Mount Rushmore, and said this: as we meet here tonight, there is a growing danger that threatens every blessing our ancestors fought so hard for. Our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. 4th of July, 2020, Mount Rushmore, Black Hills of South Dakota. Okay, what is the point of my story? The point of my story is, look how much effort a president of the most powerful empire on planet Earth that exists right now is making on the Black Lives Matter movement, how much effort he's making using the propaganda machinery of the media in order to quash it. It is because the American psyche has not come to terms with its own history. So he obviously is perpetuating and pushing something that lives in all of us, which is that, man, why didn't they tear down their statue? Why they want to change Paslow building? Why they want to do this? Why they want to do that? They people crazy. And if you think I'm crazy, check the transcript of the news when you, Yaya, and a group protested the opening of the PGA. I know I'm going off script, but this is important. They call you all a ragtag. That's what they call you, a ragtag group, that you got up some cardboard sign. That language dismisses the core point that Annie Flowers made, that Elfrida Reyes made, and that you made in 2020. The core point of the survival of yourself. Isn't that self-determination? That to me is the core idea that is being undermined, the idea of self-determination. It doesn't matter if it's one or if it's 1,001, or it doesn't matter, as Trump is showing, if you have a budget of 700 billion. They are defending something, you know. And if we don't defend ourselves and what we stand for, then somebody else is going to defend it for you. That is the point. So they quashed the rebellion. And 30 years later, in 1930s, it took Elfrida Reyes, and a black woman, a black Belizean, who is, again, totally off the radar screen of our imagination and of our sense of exploring our story. We don't know who Elfrida is. We don't know who Annie is. And there is a reason for that. And I want to repeat without sounding preachy and repetitive, but that's the way I learned to teach, to repeat. It is not that we are interested in forgetting. It is that we do not know what it is we have forgotten. That, to me, is very important. We do not know what we have forgotten. And it is for us, we, the people who live in this geographic space called Belize, to defend the identity of self-determination, to defend the identity of freedom and struggle and resistance. So the same way we build a narrative to say that we struggle for independence as a small little speck nation on planet Earth with the support of people like Che Guevara, who he's the first one to get up, you know. If you look at the history books, it was Che Guevara in 61, 3 years before our self-government, who stood up in Paraguay and said the people of Belize should get their independence. That is erased. That isn't even brought forward. And it is in the 1970s where the non-aligned movement, not the narrative that, oh, the British gave us independence. How many books have you seen that says that? The British granted us. Hear that word? Granted. It's like you're giving a piece of land, grant. So every time you face the language of the narrative that is imposed on us, you need to question how much of a lie and how that was designed to fit into the psychology and to make you think what they want you to think. So we weren't granted anything, nor was that riot stopped for the good peace and order of the colony at the time, so to speak. The point I'm trying to make with this 1919 is it is just one more of a chronicle of things that we don't know we have forgotten, which, as Yaya in her black notes rightly said, starts off with 1794. But I always tell my students, I am an African, me, so the color of my skin, I am an African because the DNA, science of me is African. Meaning that the first woman, the first human that delivered the rest of the humans that made up 7 billion comes from Africa. And not just comes from Africa as a birthplace, that's important, the birthplace of our humanity, but comes from Africa as the birthplace of our imagination, of creativity, of art, of architecture, of spirituality, of farming, of agriculture, all these things that we hold sacred, or we should hold sacred as human beings today, even more so now with COVID. You see how we're undermining farming, no? When everybody was locked up, we say, oh, if I ever get a piece of land, I'm going to farm. And the moment you now come out of COVID, I wonder when the ship will come bring in the things to make a eat. That is the point, that we have not yet come to terms The same way the Americans have not come to terms with who we really are. So when we say this is my identity, you have to question how riddled your identity is with a pack of lies. Rooster is on. The rooster is on.
Your mic muted, yeah.
Because I figure when my mic the on, it could be my static go to impact the technical element of the show. Please share who Ondofe Iyo is, this year's Emancipation Day speaker.
Yes, thank you for that. Andofe Joe Iyo, many people know him as Joe Iyo, but his name is Andofe Iyo. Was a professor at the University of Belize, originally maybe 20 plus years ago, I would say, migrated from Nigeria and came to Belize. And since his arrival here, in my view, has done an incredible work. Yes, it is intellectual work in the first instance, and I will explain. He published towards multiculturalism. I like how he put towards, because it doesn't say that we are multicultural, but he explains the origins of our multicultural nature, background, origins, but he does not conclude it, because he, like Professor Baina Bello of Haiti, he says it is an ongoing process. It is not a destination. Freedom is not a destination. It is a journey of constant self-criticism. So his book is an amazing book, which is out of print, but we need to pledge, and I always end up getting into trouble when I pledge things because I have to end up doing it. But we need to make that book more relevant and publish maybe in a shorter version for the TikTok generation today. But the point I'm making is that Dr. Iyo harnessed the energy of our university. Eventually, we got, I should say, finally, under his leadership, we got, and the provocation of others like Evan Exide, we got a history department inside the university, which I understand is now under threat and being undermined. But it was there inside that history department where the idea to build a cadre of young students that will then go out and teach, so like to train a new generation of Belizeans to teach about our story, excuse me, the African and Maya story. And so along with Dr. Angel Cal, they set up the Multicultural Studies Center within the university, and they started to publish all the books you see dangling around every now and then, African and Maya history for Standard 4, Standard 5, Standard 6. But like a very good society that is interested in not knowing what they have forgotten, we just throw that way, pitch that way, as we would say in Creole, put that to our side, and that is now irrelevant. Let us be realistic. That is irrelevant to the education system. Why? Because we have an education system that is interested in education and not in learning. There's a huge difference. And so Ondofe Iyo is now in 2020, this is a great privilege that he is coming forward, a person that has been so integral in developing our young minds, the Delmer Zibs of the world, the Litos, the Ruby Races of the world, who are out there struggling every day to develop the new our story, the fresh our story narrative. They come out of that process. And like what we were saying earlier, we can't expect we snap our fingers and then things will just happen. It is a long road to freedom, as the great John Lewis, who passed away yesterday, would say. I think it was yesterday or today he passed away. Maybe it was yesterday. But the point is that he will now be giving a Zoom presentation, and we will be designing the promotion for that. And I am very grateful that Yaya has consistently remained engaged in keeping that August 1st alive.
It's a collective effort, and because of financial limitations and the COVID-19 reality, it will be a communal Zoom conversation. You could expect that information early this week. Dwight, we say a whole lot. Make a hear where want to be a final thought to this morning.
I think the topic that we discussed today about the relevance of the 1919 revolution, and I'm kind of grateful for Yasser. He's a real true history, student of history. The only time I do a lot of history, I when I passed it for GC many years ago. I had, I always go back to historical, to put things in a historical perspective, because it gives you some amount of direction on where you could or should go. And I always tell people that we need to understand where we came from to know where we're going. Because I think it was Marcus Garvey who said, a people without knowledge of their history are like a tree without roots. We all know what will happen to that tree. Eventually, it'll get blown down. So I think it was important that we had this discussion. But beyond that, and I also like how Yasser put things in a context in terms of the TikTok generation. I don't know that um, I'm still trying to imagine what it will look like to see everything packaged for the TikTok generation, but I have no doubt if anybody could do it, Yasser will be able to do it.
Pressure, that's you.
No pressure at all. One of my enduring memories of Dr. Eo was the fact that he mentioned to me years ago that there was a huge Creole community in the area of Deep River in southern Belize. And that's something that a lot of us don't know about. During the colonial era, when a lot of logging was being done in the area, apparently there was a community of over 3,000 that live in the Deep River area. I don't know if you know where Deep River is, Yasser, but it's a little bit south of of Independence. When you're going to it's about, I think, 20 miles or so from Independence when you're going to Punta Gorda. But that area apparently was a big logging area, and apparently three rather large communities sprung up, one of them being a little further south on the coast. So those are the kinds of pieces of information that I think it's important for Belizeans to get, to understand that we do have a history that's worthy of recounting, and it's more than just Belize City and the Belize River. And not to say that that's not important as well, no? But to understand that we have a country that has contributed as a whole. Additionally, I want to reach out, as I usually do, to particularly the young Black Belizeans, tell them that we have to start to take more responsibility for our own lives and our own actions. It's okay to blame somebody else, but we need to also start to decide that we want to see things different for ourselves. And if it means standing up to somebody occasionally, then we have to do that. If it means challenging some of the things that we are being told, or things that are being expected of us, then we have to do that. But we have to be willing to stand up for ourselves and to change the course and change the direction that we find ourselves going in right now. And I don't know if there's any other way we could put that, no? But again, I have to say, kudos to Yasser for his three modules and making them as relevant as possible to what is happening here in the right?
Respect, Dwight. Thanks. I'll try to get this camera for come back on. Yes, sir. Please give someone said that they didn't hear any of the quote that you shared. So if you could please share the quote again, because I never hear none of it because of the static. And then make us share the link. It's 1919revolution.weebly.com. Then the figure is 1919, and then revolution.weebly.com. That's the website where you could go online and get the electronic copy of the 1919 booklet that Delmar Zabe wrote
Well, also,
ancestors who raised up against last year, I mean the 100th anniversary, 2019 for 1919. I find the quote, yes, sir? Yes, sir, they look for the quote. Make a just remind, go ahead, you find it?
I find it, but am I going to be allowed to say a few words as well, in addition to the quote?
Go ahead, man. Go ahead. You got to guess.
All right, I will end with the quote then. So let me say before the quote that it was a great pleasure and I felt very comfortable because I felt good, like I was going off. I was very well aware that, and I felt like I was in my classroom, which I feel very free to go off in. So this was the first electronic going off that I performed. But let me say two things before I end with a quote from my little, I'll take 2 minutes. In 2007, I had made a proposal that from standard 4 to fourth form, sorry, from standard 4, standard 5, standard 6 to fourth form, that we should give all the students a laptop, one laptop per child. That was 12 years ago, right? Today, when I do the mathematics, we are dealing with 30,000 young people in that frame. And we were to still a laptop as a state, as a responsibility. In my mind, it will be half of the problem we have in our school system. We have a problem of food for the mind and food for the body. Food for the mind would be the laptop and designing the curriculum around a digital device platform delivery vehicle. It would cost far more less than buying books every year, and it would cost much less after the first year of investment because you'll only have to be buying for standard 4 every year after that, if you know what I mean, because the students will go standard 5 and then move on, right? So we're talking about a less than $7 million project. You can put the uniform and you can implement two things: the laptop and a food program for all the schools that require a food program that is based on healthy. Why? Because instead of us having a Ministry of Agriculture, we should have a Ministry of Food Security right now. Instead of having a Ministry of Education, we should have a Ministry of Learning right now. Instead of having a Ministry of even Finance, we should have a Ministry of Accountability. And instead of having a Ministry of Health, we should have a Ministry of Well-being. And instead of having a Ministry of Teaching, we should have a Ministry of Consciousness, Ministry of Creativity, a Ministry of Motivation, a Ministry of ICT etiquette, how to use those devices, not just to go on the TikTok, although I love going on it, no problem, but to have the same etiquette that you would have in your real life conduct on that device. And I wrote a short poem that I wanted to share before. If you love the roots like the fruits, and if you love the roots like the flowers, then reach and flower. Anyway, let me read the quote. Due to the continual inhumane treatment experienced by dark-skinned women from white British oppressors, women, children, and men whose homes were cleaned, whose clothes were washed, whose food were cooked, and whose white-skinned babies and children were nursed and cared for primarily by black-skinned women, our sisters felt justified when encouraging their black lovers, husbands, brothers, uncles, sons, family members, and friends to rise up and rebel in the face of the unequal treatment. The horrific realities of black people in 1919 were intentionally created within the white supremacy infrastructure by European oppressors. Similarly, as it continues today in Belize 100 years later in 2019. This book is free, F-R-E-E.
Respect. Again, you can get that book at 1919revolution.weebly.com. I tell you, so, I want to tell a woman to, it texted and said, just had a mental orgasm, power to Yasser. And then one brother texted and said, I am truly enjoying and appreciating this Our Story lesson. I need a copy of her book as well, please. Listen, me not got, Yasser to tell him the thing. I have this book. And I write notes in there for black people.
Soon coming.
Everywhere I go, I write notes for black people. So that's the way I started to call it Black Notes book. It's not that I have a published book. Yes, big up Numi Usher, Katie Numi Usher. Her electronic launch was this past Wednesday, and her book is available online. Should I, yes, sir, please tell people where they can go for that book.
imagefactorybelize.com. And I'll also post the 1919 as well on the Image Factory Circle. See two of them next to each other because sometimes people don't want to know what all over the place, just so we can have it all over the place.
Salute. Salute to Katie Numi Usher, who has been consistent in her 12 plus years of work to bring to the fore people who are consistently erased, people whose voices are erased, especially Black women. And so even the Bembe series that comes out of Image Factory Art Foundation, that we say we now put for we story front and center, and salute to Creme Radio, Creme TV, and Mandela for having an independent Black-owned media space where we could have their conversations, where we could change the narrative of Black people. So yes, you could. Those are places you could go and continue to get information. Both UEF and Image Factory want to continue work together for create one online space where people could go and have access to consciousness, information, artwork. Thanks to Lito as well for his participation in the Not Open the PGIA August 15th protest. Again, you could go. I never give one of this link. I didn't. We're overdue. I'm gonna finish at 12 o'clock. I just want to give one of this link online. Upon could go and sign the petition. It's the there you go. Thanks, Harlan. I don't know if they could read it, Harlan. It's http://chng.it/ capital letters RFWK, lowercase letters YW, figure 7, lowercase letter S, capital SN. And that is the Not Open the PGIA for August 15th at change.org. So we encourage Belizeans. We have, I hope that they may have more signatures by now. And this was launched on the 14th of July. And initially the aim was 100, and then it got from 100 to 1,000. So currently we have 956 people have signed. And so he's saying, let's go to 1,000. And then after that, I'm hoping it's going to another 1,000. This protest, this virtual protest petition ends on August 15, 2020. Thanks, Dwight, for co-hosting. Thanks, Yasser, for being our guest. Thanks, Harlan Wagner, who is our operator at Creme Television. He makes sure everything went up on the screen. Thanks to JC Arzu, scientist, chief engineer at Creme Radio. The show is simulcasted at Creme Radio at 5:30 this evening. It'll be repeated on Creme Television, and later on in the day, I'll put a link for the show on Creme Sunday Review timeline. Thanks to all them people who have consistently support. We'll be built a road until with thanks, give us suggestions. August 1st, we will be having our drumming and libation at a Marine Parade in front of Golden Bay. You can expect that information early this week. And then we'll have one Zoom community conversation with Dr. Adolphe Ear, Dr. Joe Ear, on August 1st, which is a Saturday. And we did that because of financial restrictions with general sponsors over our gottos, funds tight right now. And because of the social distancing, usually with a Gateway Youth Center and Gateway Youth Center they can't facilitate the amount of people they usually do. And be less people. From observing on Facebook, which is concerning for me, is the people in the social spaces still not wear their mask. I don't know if we don't feel like one time that socialization time, we don't have to wear the mask. You have a responsibility for wear your mask, wash your hands regularly, and maintain social distancing. Belizean, this is real. This are not play Belizean people. Wear your mask. The law says one face mask or one face covering over your nose and your mouth. Your nose and your mouth must be covered at all times, especially when you come out of your house. If you keep it covered, people, have your sanitizer. I notice the bus got to wipe down their seat like after the first one in the first bus, then you say, but no, the bus terminal have a responsibility to have sanitizer, certain things. Belizeans is real Belizeans that we black and brown people at bottom of the barrel and pay the price written on. No NHI. Doctors get terminated from KHMH because they can't pay them. Some they live with health issues. Belizean people, this that we have to save ourselves. Wearing a mask. I don't feel no way entitled to know what you want to have on a mask. Stop the hug up people wanting to beat people. That's serious. Buck with an elbow. This is a new way of being. I want with it wrong for a long time. Do I you wear a mask?
All the time.
Yes, sir, to wear a mask?
I got one in my pocket, I got one in my truck, I got every in my bag, anywhere I go.
Good. And one more thing before we go. There is a continuous protest at the Port of Belize Limited. The Port of Belize Limited staff then protest during their lunch hour. The lunch hour from 12 to 1. This is the 19th day of protesting. With the Ash Belizean people for showing the solidarity and go out there. Then they said the port don't do it. They take 10% of their money. 10%. So if you make $1 and they take 10 cents, remember all them people money what they take. Plus then they threatening now for terminate one number of the employees who are part of the union. So that could be considered as union busting. On a stay on top of it, Belizean people are telling them what happened at Port of Belize Limited matter to all of we. If we could go out carrying the children, wear on a mask, carrying a sanitizer, carrying a water. We just have 1 hour, come out and support the Port of Belize Limited staff and salute to the stevedores. We're in a solidarity with them as well. One love every time to the Christian Workers Union. Thanks to leadership and active participation, the dip on the ground, the stair one giant in my face. One love every time, Belizean people. Have a beautiful Sunday.